United States Senate Foreign Relations Committee will come to order. Thank you to our witnesses for being here today, and thank you for everyone else who is attending. We're glad to have everyone attend these meetings as room will allow. We do have a rule in this committee that there'll be no interruptions and there'll be no attempt to contact either a member of this committee or one of the witnesses during this hearing, and the consequences are serious if you do. So with that, I want to, the way this is going to work, I'm going to make an opening statement. Senator Shaheen will. We'd like to hear from our witnesses, and then what we will do is open it up to a round of questions for members who are here or who show up. So we'll start by saying thank you to our witnesses for testifying today on what is a really, really important issue. Right now, across the ocean, there are entire cities devoted to scamming Americans. In Cambodia, in Laos, and in Burma, scam center operations have become a multi-billion-dollar criminal enterprise that enables a range of illegal activity like human trafficking, money laundering, illicit drug trade, and even arms trafficking around the globe, presenting a growing threat to Americans' wallets and to our national security. We have all received one of these strange phone calls or texts. In fact, as common as it is, I wouldn't be surprised if somebody in this room receives one of those during this hearing. Just last year, Idahoans reported losing $34 million to online investment scams. That's just Idaho. Nationally, Americans are losing billions each year to these scammers, and these losses continue to grow to the benefit of our adversaries. Many of these scam centers have close ties to Chinese transnational criminal organizations who take orders from the Chinese Communist Party and work to promote the CCP's foreign policy priorities. These criminals have created an industry that traps hundreds of thousands of victims of human trafficking in scam compounds. They trick their victims with false jobs advertisements, take their passports, and in some cases, torture people to force them to steal your money. Fortunately, the administration is working to end this horrible practice with its Scam Center Strike Force. It has blocked more than $800 million of cryptocurrency transactions from going to these Chinese criminal groups. But that number is just a drop in the bucket compared to the scale of the problem. As these scam centers evolve to use AI and other technologies to stay ahead of law enforcement, it is more important than ever that we mount an effective response. This will require entire U.S. government working with our international partners to address the pipeline of human trafficking and build complex legal cases against these criminal groups who are often aided and abetted by foreign governments. This issue is not a partisan issue. It is clearly a bipartisan issue. It affects every American, and these scammers don't care whether you're a Republican, a Democrat, they just want your money. I hope today that our witnesses will share more about the State Department's role in this effort. How are we working with partners like the UK, Australia, and Japan, whose citizens have also lost money to these scam operations to stop these crimes? We'd like an answer to that question. What can we do to help foreign law enforcement agencies to build strong cases against the beneficiaries of these scam centers and ensure they are shuttered for good? Another question we'd like answered. And finally, what are we doing to hold the governments of countries that host and enable these scam operations accountable? I look forward to learning the answer to these questions from our witnesses, as well as hearing their recommendations for what additional authorities or increased international cooperation efforts may be needed to protect the American people from this growing threat. Thank you to the witnesses for being here. With that, I'd like to turn it over to the distinguished ranking member, Senator Shaheen.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to our witnesses for being here today. As the chairman says, behind many of the online scams targeting Americans are scam compounds where trafficked workers are forced to defraud victims online. Just a few years ago, these compounds were concentrated in a handful of countries. But today, scam operations have spread to countries across Africa, the Middle East, Asia, and even in the Western Hemisphere. Americans lose more than $12 billion, billion with a B, a year from schemes perpetrated by overseas scam compounds. We have that poster just to remind everybody about the total. Global losses are now estimated to exceed $100 billion each year. And every senator on this committee has constituents whose lives have been upended by sophisticated online fraud. In Hollis, New Hampshire, one 78-year-old lost about $150,000 after being lured into a fraudulent online investment scheme. And another Granite State resident reported purchasing a vehicle online and lost eroding the rule of law and exploiting weak governance. And they thrive on corruption. They rely on victims from over 80 countries who have been trafficked and forced to carry out these scams. And they generate billions for transnational criminal organizations, many with links to China. Fighting them requires diplomacy, support for human trafficking victims, international law enforcement cooperation, sanctions, and strong partnerships with foreign governments. Now, the good news is that the United States has begun responding to this threat. The administration has elevated countering scam compounds to be a national security priority. It's imposed sanctions on scam operators and human traffickers, and it has pursued criminal prosecutions and launched a government-wide effort to combat these networks. These are important steps, but the criminal networks are adapting just as quickly, and when one country cracks down, they move somewhere else. Without a coordinated global response, it becomes a game of whack-a-mole. If these criminal organizations operate across borders, our response has to be to operate across borders. That means preventing recruitment, supporting trafficking survivors, working with our allies and partners, and holding both criminal organizations and the governments that enable them accountable. That's exactly the approach Senator Cornyn and I put forward in the Scam Compound Accountability and Mobilization, or SCAM Act. Figured you'd like that acronym, which passed the Senate by unanimous consent. The bill would build on the administration's work by making that coordinated international response a permanent part of U.S. policy. Today's hearing is about how we build on that progress. I look forward to hearing from our witnesses about what's working, about where the gaps remain, and what it will take to build a response that is every bit as coordinated as the criminal networks we're trying to defeat. Again, thank you both for being here.
Senator Shaheen, thank you for those remarks. We're fortunate to have two people from the State Department, Assistant Secretary. First of all, Michael DeSambre, who's Assistant Secretary for Bureau of East Asian and Pacific Affairs. Thank you for coming. We also have David Bedard, who's a Deputy Assistant Secretary, and he's with the Bureau of International Narcotics and Law Enforcement Affairs, also from the State Department. So if you would give us the benefit of what you think we should know, gentlemen. We'll start with you, Mr. DeSambre, and then we'll go to Mr. Bedard. Give us your thoughts, and then we'll open it to questions from the committee. So, Mr. DeSambre, the floor is yours.
Chairman Risch, Ranking Member Shaheen, and distinguished members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to testify on protecting Americans from global scam operations and how the department is countering criminal online scams in the East Asia and Pacific region. In Burma, Cambodia, and Laos, criminal scam operations have reached an unprecedented industrialized scale. What began as isolated fraud rings have become a sprawling illicit economy, operating from compounds staffed by professionalized and sometimes coerced workforce. Credible sources report that hundreds of thousands of individuals from dozens of countries are trafficked into these operations across these three countries alone. This is an industry with its own infrastructure, labor force, and supply chains. Experts agree that Chinese-origin transnational criminal organizations are the major force driving the scam economy, with the vast majority of operations led and managed by Chinese nationals. Americans have become significant targets. As Senator Shaheen just indicated, initial 2025 estimates placed reported losses from Southeast Asia-based scam groups at $12.5 billion US, a conservative figure. As our analysis nears completion, we anticipate actual losses to be significantly higher. It is estimated that these groups inflicted up to $114 billion in losses on East Asia and Pacific countries in 2025. They're also resilient. When pressured in one location, they relocate and adapt, reducing their physical footprint while sustaining scam intensity through technology. In Cambodia, some compounds closed by police raids open operations elsewhere in the country. The Department of State's strategy is to identify vulnerabilities across the transnational criminal organizations and apply sustained pressure at scale to disrupt their criminal actions and impose costs on the organizations. That includes going after the bosses and financiers of the criminal organizations, in addition to disrupting their physical and digital infrastructure, financial flows, and communication networks. Dismantling leadership and cutting off financing is one of the critical ways to break the criminal networks rather than merely temporarily disrupting them. On March 6, 2026, President Trump signed Executive Order 14390, directing the Secretary of State, Treasury, War, and Homeland Security, and the Attorney General to develop a whole-of-government action plan to identify, disrupt, and dismantle these networks. The growing scale of the threat demands a unified response. Estimated losses to Americans in 2025 were triple the level in 2023, with Americans in all 50 states targeted. My INL colleague, David Bedard, will detail the interagency and department action plans. Our diplomatic message is consistent. Countries must target transnational criminal organization bosses, not just the low-level operations, and dismantle the entire scam ecosystem. We are raising this issue with Cambodia, Burma, and Laos, and other regional partners, and with China. We've encouraged China to demonstrate that it is not abetting these crimes by allowing Chinese crime bosses to be held accountable internationally. We must drive up costs for these transnational criminal organizations, restrict their access to victims, and make clear that there is no safe haven jurisdiction that can shield them from the reach of the United States. We have backed this message with action. On July 23rd, Secretary Rubio announced a visa restriction policy targeting individuals involved in cybercrime and cyber-enabled crime, and we intend to use it. In 2025, a Section 311 rule cut off Huion Group's access to US dollar accounts. Sanctions and US law enforcement action against the Prince Group helped trigger an international takedown of the organization, its CEO, Chun Ji, and over 140 affiliates. Chun Ji was also the target of a DOJ indictment and the forfeiture of approximately $15 billion in cryptocurrency, the largest such forfeiture in history. On April 23rd, Treasury sanctioned Cambodian Senator Kok An and 28 individuals and entities in his scam network. And on April 2026, DOJ's Scam Center Strike Force charged 2 Chinese nationals tied to a Burma-based scam center targeting Americans and froze over $700 million in cryptocurrency. In April, in partnership with INL, I led the launch of a 13-country coalition of our allies and partners most affected by the threat and capable of acting against it. The Counter Scams Contact Group includes Australia, Canada, Indonesia, Japan, Malaysia, New Zealand, the Philippines, the Republic of Korea, Singapore, Thailand, the United Kingdom, and Vietnam. We are using this group to collectively raise the cost on scam groups through law enforcement action, asset seizures, financial sanctions, diplomatic pressure, and information sharing, while reaffirming U.S. leadership in the region. The threat originates abroad, but endangers tens of thousands of Americans nationwide. I credit the committee for elevating attention on this fight, including through the Bipartisan Scam Act. As part of the administration's whole-of-government effort, the Department of State will continue to do all we can, including in East Asia and the Pacific, to drive up the costs on these criminal scam groups and drive down the harm to Americans. Thank you, and I welcome your questions.
Thank you very much. We appreciate that. Mr. Bedard, tell us what we need to know.
Chairman Risch, and thank you, Ranking Member Shaheen and distinguished members of the committee. Thank you for the opportunity to testify on behalf of the Department of State and our work to protect American citizens from criminal online scams. U.S. losses are staggering, but the true cost is not in dollars alone. Behind every statistic is a human story, as each of you both rightly pointed out. And those are the people that we do this work for. While Burma, Cambodia, and Laos remain the epicenter, operations are expanding across South Asia, Africa, into the Western Hemisphere and beyond. Global money laundering and human trafficking networks compound the problem, along with inadequate screening of trafficking victims and criminals exporting the tradecraft on a global scale. As countries crack down, scammers are diversifying beyond large industrial-scale compounds into smaller, decentralized operations in hotels and residential areas, making them harder for law enforcement to detect. Chinese origin transnational criminal organizations drive the Southeast Asian scam economy. They operate as loosely affiliated businesses, and many are polycriminal, running scams, trafficking drugs and people, and offering cybercrime as a service. These organizations operate in layers. There's a leadership tier that colludes with government officials, a management tier running day-to-day operations, and scam workers, many of them trafficking victims, others that are willing participants. Across every layer sit the facilitators, the complicit officials, the lawyers, the accountants, the bankers, the crypto converters who keep this illicit economy running. These networks exploit a persistent vulnerability. Criminal operations are borderless, but law enforcement's not. They base themselves in jurisdictions with weak legal frameworks and limited technical capacity, betting that fragmented responses cannot keep pace. In March, President Trump signed Executive Order 14390, combating cybercrime, fraud, and predatory schemes against American citizens, and directed the Secretary of State to demand enforcement action from foreign governments. The State Department is coordinating with the National Security Council and the Homeland Security Council on an international approach built around 4 lines of effort. First, a global diplomatic campaign pressing key countries to act through high-level démarches, joint statements, and coordinated action. Our regional bureaus, such as the one Assistant Secretary DeSambre leads diplomatic engagement with foreign capitals to build political will, while INL engages the Ministries of Interior, Public Security, and Justice, and the law enforcement agencies that do the operational work. We also work multilaterally to raise international standards and align partners with a common approach. INL led the adoption of the first ever UN resolution on combating cyber fraud, which was co-sponsored with Japan and the United Kingdom. Second, imposing costs on the transnational criminal organizations and their enablers and the complicit officials who give them safe haven. Our tools include visa restrictions, support for asset seizures, extradition requests, and targeted sanctions to deny these networks the resources and to drive them to change their behavior. On July 23rd, Secretary Rubio announced new visa restriction policy targeting cyber criminals, in particular those engaged in cyber scams and sextortion. Third, operational law enforcement cooperation. We cannot arrest our way out of this from Washington, D.C. We rely on foreign law enforcement. Where warranted, INL provides training and equipment so foreign partners can investigate these enterprises and their financial flows in cooperation with U.S. law enforcement. Thailand is a strong example. Following the evacuation of thousands of scam workers from compounds in Burma, INL funded FBI deployments to embed agents with the Royal Thai Police in the Anti-Cyber Scam Center, giving U.S. law enforcement its first ever opportunity to interview individuals coming directly out of scam compounds. Those interviews and evidence transformed our understanding of scam compound leadership, their operations, and their tradecraft. FBI and Thai personnel used INL-funded digital forensics tools to examine more than 8,000 phones and 1,500 hard drives. That work has supported multiple federal indictments and arrests targeting scam leaders and facilitators. Fourth, prevention and outreach, partnering with tech platforms to take down scam infrastructure, working with financial institutions to block illicit transactions, and educating Americans through public awareness campaigns. Together, these lines of effort will produce investigations, arrests, and prosecutions of cyber criminals who target Americans. They will impose a deterrent effect on the criminals and their enablers, and they will deepen our understanding of criminal tradecraft to better protect Americans at home. We appreciate the bipartisan interest in this issue and welcome the committee's continued engagement as we implement the executive order. We look forward to working with you to protect Americans from these threats. Thank you, and I welcome your questions.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Badar. We'll now do a round of questions with members who are here. It's a fascinating subject, really, and I'm going to start. I'm going to ask either one of you want to take this on. We talk about what's happening here in America, and I think we as Americans take for granted the fact that this is a capitalist country, not a socialist or communist country, so that the vast majority of Americans, not all, but the vast majority, have access to some type of capital that they can that can be stolen. So obviously we are a target for this because we are a wealthy country. So the question I would have for you is, I'm sure there are some other countries where people do have access to capital. What other countries are notoriously a target for these scammers, and are we coordinating with those countries? Whichever one of you want to go.
Senator, thank you very much for that question. I think, unfortunately, we're seeing most countries around the world being targeted, even those countries where you don't think that they have large amounts of capital accumulated. As I mentioned in my opening remarks, estimates are that in Southeast Asia, there's been $114 billion that has been stolen from people resident in Southeast Asia. So it is a problem in every country around the world. But coordinating internationally is clearly an important role that we see ourselves in the State Department to do, and that's why earlier this year, David Bedard and I launched this international contact group focusing on those countries, both where they're being affected, but also where they've got the ability to really work with us on some of the aspects, particularly in terms of financial seizures and asset seizures, so including Japan, UK, Korea, Australia, New Zealand, Singapore, Canada, that those are all countries being affected by this as well, to varying degrees, but every single one of them is being affected, and we are coordinating with them because it is a global issue.
That's important, obviously, that we do coordinate. I guess the reason I asked that question is it just amazed me, the type of scams they have. I think everybody here got the one that Senator Shaheen referred to about the traffic tickets or the, we don't have tolls out west, but I was getting a claim for tolls that we didn't have. So that's not a big amount of money. We hear about the big scams where people lost thousands or even millions of dollars, but this was a particularly small one, but if they get enough people, I suppose it adds up. So thus that question. In any event, appreciate that, and I think that as we go forward, we're going to recognize that there are countries that are involved in this at the level of their government. China always wrings their hands when we arrest somebody and disassociates themselves with them, but the more you deal with China, the more you realize that that thing goes right up through the government. What role does China play in all of this, in enabling these things?
Senator, thank you. I think we, as mentioned, we do understand that most of these transnational criminal organizations are led by Chinese nationals or ethnic Chinese individuals. And so clearly there is a role of China in that regard. Many of those are actually located outside of China, though. So whether it's in Cambodia, Burma, or Laos, there's Chinese nationals or ethnic Chinese individuals running those transnational criminal organizations. But you're absolutely correct that corruption as part of these countries, whether it's in Cambodia, Burma, Laos, others, is clearly one of the challenges. And the involvement of government is something we're very focused on and trying to ensure that we work with those governments to let them understand that there will be ramifications to the extent that they're corruptly involved in targeting American citizens.
So let's talk about the ramifications. What programs have you used that you have found most effective in combating what's going on, both from a preventative nature and remedial nature?
Sure. Maybe I'll talk briefly, and then I'll turn it over to Das Bedard to speak about some of the law enforcement cooperation. I mean, one of the benefits that we've seen in the State Department of having the regional bureaus now sort of running the foreign assistance is that we can use foreign assistance to really direct on these problems as they arise. So starting in October of last year, on the sidelines of ASEAN, we announced $52 million in funding focused on four main areas. One is prevention, second is financial disruption, third is victim protection, and then third is law enforcement assistance. And I'll have Das Bedard talk about the law enforcement assistance. But we're definitely finding that working with the governments, helping them understand the issues and trying to ensure that they go after the scam centers and the scam bosses has been the most important thing, because up until recently, there's been a lot of focus on just knocking down the scam centers, which then they just proliferate somewhere else. You knock them down in one place, they go somewhere else. And so really, we're working on within sort of our like-minded countries, as well as working with Cambodia, really trying to make sure they go after the scam bosses. And maybe Das Bedard.
Mr. Bedard.
Thank you, Assistant Secretary. As an example of the law enforcement assistance that we give, I'll highlight what the work that we do in Bangkok with the Royal Thai Police. INL and HSI have recruited a number of Royal Thai Police officers with particular skill sets in cyber scam knowledge, in cyber and financial expertise into a transnational criminal investigation unit. So these people are very focused on the problem that is emanating from Southeast Asia, and the same criminals that are targeting Thai are also targeting Americans, and we think that there's a mutual benefit there. I mentioned the victims that are leaving Burma and entered into Thailand. INL funded those deployments of the FBI agents to process the 8,000 phones and the 1,500 hard drives. We were able to work with the Royal Thai Police based on years of experience, years of law enforcement assistance that was provided to the Thai, building up their capabilities and really letting them be good partners for U.S. law enforcement. This work supported multiple federal indictments. Assistant Secretary DeSambre mentioned the 2 Chinese transnational nationals that were indicted that came directly out of this work. And we think that this work can be replicated throughout the world because this is not just focused in Southeast Asia. As mentioned by Senator Shaheen, this is proliferating across the world, and we're looking to replicate this model elsewhere.
Thank you, gentlemen. Senator Shaheen.
Well, thank you. That is very informative. I don't know if either of you caught the piece this morning on one of the network morning shows about scams, but they were interviewing somebody who had worked on this issue for a number of years, who made the point that right now we've got 13 different agencies that have overlapping responsibilities to deal with scams, and there's nobody who is heading that effort up across those agencies. He was saying, you know, this is one of the, we need to treat this like combat, and so we need somebody in charge. How appropriate is that criticism, and how do you coordinate with other agencies that are working on this? Either one of you.
Thank you for the question, Senator. And I won't comment on the appropriateness of the criticism, but I do understand that this is a whole government approach, and many agencies are focused on this. The President's executive order demands and is looking for coordination on this issue. It is a national security priority for the President, and one that we certainly take seriously. The action plan that was directed by the President is currently in the interagency review process to deconflict some of the concerns that you have raised, and we certainly think that the task force that will be implemented through that executive order will solve the problems that you may be referencing.
So earlier this year, the bipartisan House Select Committee on China released a report that identified overseas scam compounds as a convergence of transnational organized crime, human trafficking, illicit finance, and corruption, with direct implications for U.S. national security and strategic competition with the Chinese Communist Party. All of those issues you both raised in your testimony. But are we raising these concerns with the highest levels in China? I'm thinking about fentanyl, which has been a huge scourge for substance misuse in the United States and in New Hampshire. And a congressional delegation met with President Xi a couple of years ago and raised this concern. And until that high-level meeting, we were not getting any real cooperation from the Chinese government to address that. So is that the level at which we should be raising these concerns?
Senator, I can tell you that we are raising these concerns, transnational criminal organizations, both fentanyl and scam centers, at the highest levels with China.
With President Xi? Has President Trump raised this issue with President Xi?
President Trump has raised transnational criminal organizations with President Xi.
And what kind of a response did he get?
Well, I think we've seen some action from them, for example, on the fentanyl area, where they have scheduled the various different precursor chemicals and otherwise.
I certainly would agree with that on the fentanyl issue, but I'm really talking about scams now, too. What are we seeing from the Chinese on scams, and have they been willing to acknowledge that Chinese nationals are leading many of these operations and that they need to be cracking down in China on it?
We have been seeing in the last 6 months, greater crackdown, by the Chinese in various different countries. So I think actually you've seen in Cambodia a lot of the, crackdowns over the last 6 months, which have actually been, to some degree very successful in decreasing the amount of scam compounds in Cambodia. I think our understanding is much of that has been driven by Chinese desire, as those scam compounds had been targeting Chinese nationals. So I think one of the benefits, shall we say, of the expansive or the expanding nature of the targeting out of the scam compounds is that they've been targeting many more countries, and those countries, including China, are now much more willing to work, themselves and also with us to try to go after these scam compounds.
So the scams are actually targeting Chinese citizens in China?
Yes, that as well as our citizens.
Yes. I know, excuse me, one of the places that we know has some of these compounds is Burma. Or Myanmar, where we don't really have any leverage because of the government there. So how do we work with countries like that, where they may have a government that's either unfriendly to the United States or is a very dysfunctional government?
Senator, that is a very good question, and it's obviously challenging in those countries. And the more we can work with the different groups within countries, and Burma is a good example, really focusing on advancing American interests and stopping scam centers is one of those interests. So we are willing to engage with all the different parties in Burma to try to accomplish that, so we can, protect American citizens from being scammed by the compounds in Burma.
And when we do that, do we get pushback from the government there, or?
I mean, obviously engaging with the different organizations to the extent that there is corrupt involvement, it's always a challenging discussion. I can say we're getting better traction in Cambodia, for example, than we are in Burma and Laos at the moment.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Senator Ricketts.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As we've discussed, overseas scam centers are center store operations that completely destroy people's livelihoods. Just to take a few recent examples from my home state of Nebraska, a man in Lancaster County lost over $50,000 in 3 years to a scammer that he met in an internet chat room. A woman in Hall County lost over $20,000 online in just 4 months in an online romance trap. And a Lincoln man in his 70s lost his retirement in a months-long online cryptocurrency scam. Sadly, this is just the tip of the iceberg. Scam centers operating across Southeast Asia are some of the biggest culprits. In recent years, they've evolved into sophisticated transnational criminal enterprises, as we've discussed here. The United States, through sanctions, asset seizures, and law enforcement operations, has taken aggressive action to address this. We're also working with partners through bilateral channels, such as in organizations such as Interpol and ASEAN. However, currently, there is no standing international body dedicated exclusively to coordinating intelligence, financial investigations, sanctions, and law enforcement against these scam networks. In the past, the U.S. has created a dedicated multinational task force when transnational threats reach strategic significance. For instance, the Giant F South was stood up in the 1990s to better address drug trafficking cartels. Mr. Bedard, given that today's scam center networks are similarly transnational, combining cybercrime, human trafficking, money laundering, and cryptocurrency, has the threat reached the point that we should establish a comparable multinational coordination mechanism?
Thank you for the question, Senator. This is certainly an issue, and one that domestically in the executive order, the President is directing us to create a task force to address this. Through that, there's an international plan, and we will certainly work with our international partners to share intelligence and address this transnational crime, as you mentioned. I will say the work that we're doing with Interpol, we think that there are very productive channels for us to work through. Interpol is standing up a global task force themselves, and we will do what we can to support that task force rather than create duplicative task forces. We see other countries that are working on this problem doing that, and we have some concerns and want to make sure that it is truly multinational and we fit in where the preponderance of the countries that are concerned about this are working.
So what would be the biggest advantages of forming these coalitions?
The biggest advantage is certainly intelligence sharing. I think the challenge that we have a 13-country contact group, and working with each of those countries, they have different regulations, they have different authorities, and having a task force allows each of those countries to bring their comparative advantage to this fight so that we can take this fight to these perpetrators wherever they are.
Over the past few years, Beijing has devoted significant resources to dismantling scam centers that target Chinese citizens. We just discussed that. However, this selective enforcement has increasingly put Americans and other foreigners in the crosshairs of Chinese scam center operators. As evidence of this, in 2024, Communist China reported a 30% decrease in money lost to online scams, while the United States witnessed a 40% increase. Many of these criminals have been repatriated from scam centers in Southeast Asia back to Communist China and released from prison. They have now set up smaller scam networks within Communist China itself, and they are exclusively targeting foreigners. This shift is due to a lack of enforcement by the Communist Chinese officials when victims are overseas. Assistant Secretary DeSambre, to what extent do you believe Communist China's current enforcement posture is encouraging scam operators to shift their focus from Chinese victims to Americans or other foreign nationals?
Senator, thank you very much for that question. We've definitely seen the pressure that China puts on countries like Cambodia to extradite back to China the various scam bosses that are caught within their network. And we're really working very closely with our international contact group that we mentioned to try to focus on putting diplomatic pressure on these countries not to deport them back to China, but to give us access to those individuals to make sure intelligence is gathered so that we can actually ensure that we can go after all the scam bosses and make sure they aren't sent back to China and able to continue to operate against American citizens.
What about the idea that China is selectively enforcing the law on these scam operators that are targeting Chinese citizens, but not really worrying about Americans or other foreigners?
I don't have any specific information on that, Senator. It wouldn't surprise me if that were to be the case. When they are sent back to China, we don't have great transparency as to what happens to them. Some of them may be, incarcerated, and others may not. We don't have that transparency.
Are there additional steps that we can be taking to make sure that Beijing prosecutes fraud against foreigners and American citizens, as opposed to just fraud on Chinese citizens?
Well, definitely. It is a topic that we discuss with China and will continue discussing with China. Understand that there's been various efforts on the FBI to work with Chinese MPS as well, and I presume they're talking to them about those topics.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Senator Kane.
Mr. Chair, thank you for holding this hearing. It's really important, and hearing, whether it's Idaho residents losing $43 million in a year, or Senator Ricketts talking about his constituents, or Senator Shaheen with $12 million annually. I mean, this is infuriating. It is absolutely infuriating. Many of us are on either the Armed Service or the Intel Committee, and a number of years ago, as we were hearing about cyber attacks from adversaries against the United States, an interesting pattern was sort of becoming manifest, which is often cyber attacks from Russia were against defense or critical infrastructure, but cyber attacks originating from China were just sucking up consumer information, a medical device manufacturer or the OPM, or there might be a consumer company with a lot of U.S. customer data, and that was the subject of cyber attack. And now we see why the strategy of sucking up American consumer data was something that China was focused on a number of years ago, as these attacks, go after people who have easy passes or who have other kinds of consumer information that has been reached through these just really outrageous activities. One of the things that I want to talk to, because every time I hear one of these stories, it really makes me angry, is if you're watching this hearing, or if you have somebody who knows about this hearing, maybe you want to know whether something's a scam. And the government has resources to try to help you figure it out. Let me just give you one example. The U.S. Senate Select Committee on Aging, chaired by Senator Scott and Senator Gillibrand, is the ranking member, has a fraud hotline specifically designed to help you figure out whether something is a scam. And it's manned Monday to Friday from 9 to 5 Eastern Time. And the phone number on that hotline is 855-303-9470. You can just go online and say Senate Committee on Aging, and there's a lot of fraud resources on that website. There's a hotline, there's information from the CFPB, from the FTC, from the Department of Justice Criminal Division. So if you're worrying about, if you even have an inkling that something might be a scam, there are people who can help you figure it out. So let me ask to our witnesses, are there other resources that you would suggest? I've given the Senate Committee on Aging website and hotline, which refers you to other resources within the federal family, but are there other resources that you would suggest if anybody's got an inkling they're being defrauded, where they can go for help?
Senator, obviously, as you indicate, this is a huge issue, and we are laser focused on protecting Americans all over the world and from activities all over the world. We in the State Department are focused, obviously, on countries outside the United States, and so what we're doing actually outside the United States is very much in line with those programs in the United States, is trying to help educate people on how to avoid being scammed. And that process has been going on for a long time. We've actually been pivoting more recently to really focusing on the enforcement and coordination with INL and others on the law enforcement, because unfortunately, as much as we try to prevent people to be victims of the crimes, it seems to continue. And so we really need to go after the bosses, which is really what we're trying to do.
And those who are perpetrating fraud get more and more sophisticated. They can use AI tools. They can, generate voices that sound similar to voices that people might be familiar with. So the sophistication level is increasing. I very much appreciate the work that y'all are doing on the enforcement side. There's just so much more, I think, education we can do on our side to give people tips about what to avoid, but also if you have an inkling, here's a place you can go and try to get some help. There's been a good bit of focus on scams originating from Southeast Asia, but I think it is important for folks to know, even though that's been the predominant, that is not the only place from which these scams originate. Here was an interesting one. In 2023, Peruvian authorities rescued 43 Malaysians who had been human trafficked to Lima and forced to conduct telecom fraud, demonstrating that this coercive compound model is not just limited to Southeast Asia. The Justice Department in July 2026, just recently in a very laudable way, announced guilty pleas in a sophisticated call center operation that was based in the Dominican Republic, which had defrauded more than 400 American seniors of more than $5 million. The average age of those defrauded was 84 years old. So this is a model that might have, spawned in Southeast Asia, but now there are other parts of the world we've got to pay attention to as well. Could you talk a little bit about activities in the Western Hemisphere? That'll be my last question.
Senator Kaine, thank you very much for raising your concerns. This is certainly a threat that is expanding globally. As Senator Ricketts mentioned, romance scams are out of West Africa, Nigeria, Cote d'Ivoire, sextortion as well. We have Indian call center scams. There's Jamaican lottery scams. There's cartel timeshare scams. It's certainly proliferating, and the concern, as you mentioned, is that the tradecraft that these Chinese transnational criminal organizations are using in Southeast Asia is being exported around the globe. We've had concerns from Sri Lanka as well about scam centers rising there. INL has a global footprint, and we certainly want to address this concern where it's predominantly affecting Americans in Southeast Asia, but also getting ahead of the concerns as it expands globally.
And Mr. Chair, as I hand it back to you, here's what we ought to worry about, that this will just multiply, because imagine you're a criminal group and you just want to make money. Okay, let's see, if I sell drugs, I've got to buy them, I got to have arms, I got to move them, I got to have boats. Some of my people are going to get killed. If you're doing human trafficking, that's hard. But to go online and just rip people off, I mean, the costs of investment up front are very, very low. The risks are much lower than in other kinds of criminal activity. And so that will probably push more of these criminal groups even more into these. So I have a feeling, I'm really glad we're doing this hearing today. I think this is a problem that's going to grow in a real geometric way.
I think that's a really good observation. I mean, all of these people, they're in it for money. And what's the easiest way to get money? What's the safest way to get money? And this certainly is ahead of these other more kinetic type of things that you're talking about. Senator Merkley.
Thank you both very much for being so engaged in this topic, and I appreciate this hearing.
There's so many.
I'm thinking about an Oregon citizen in Roseburg who was caught in an online gold investment scam, and then went to a recovery service, which also turned out to be a scam, so was double scammed. I was just looking up that organization on the internet, Online Justice. It now goes to a blank page, but it's easy to reinvent such a firm overnight with a new name and a different website. And that individual in Roseburg lost $145,000. An individual in Portland who was contacted by a celebrity imposter, and that celebrity imposter said that they were opening an acting school in New York, and the person was convinced that was a worthy thing to do and invested $100,000. Of course, it disappeared. There are so many different strategies, people posing as financial advisors, doing the long scams of building online relationships, romantic relationships, individuals posing as representatives of their bank, and so on and so forth. So I think about all of that. I'm so glad we're doing everything we can internationally. I want to say a special thank you to the individuals who have been taken into these environments as international workers, like a Ugandan who was recruited, spent 7 months in a Miramar compound, eventually escaped, but was willing to share the story about what happened inside. And another individual from Cambodia who was, again, given a job offer, thought it was legitimate, line of work, but was also caught in that web of a military compound where they couldn't escape and they had to pose. But here's the thing I'm thinking about, which is a couple things. One, that a lot of individuals still don't transfer their money into crypto online. They go to these crypto ATMs. And we've heard reports that more than a majority of the transactions of those crypto ATMs involve scams. Is that a piece of the puzzle that you all have been looking at?
Thank you for the question, Senator. I have had conversations with my United Kingdom counterparts, and they've mentioned a similar concern about crypto ATMs. I certainly think that we can get the U.S. interagency and the domestic law enforcement in contact with those counterparts in the United Kingdom to address this problem. It's not something that INL is focused on in our work internationally.
Okay. But it really is relevant to Americans being scammed, because before, the scams generally worked, you went to your bank and you did a wire transfer, and banks were like, oh, wait a minute, we have a good relationship with you, we just want to talk to you for a minute, are you sure that you want to be able to transfer money to this location overseas, because we want to make sure people are not caught in scams. But when you go to a crypto ATM, there's nobody there to say, oh, wait a minute, we just want to we are your champion, we are your supporter, we want to make sure you're not caught in a scam. So that's a key piece of the puzzle. I would encourage attention to it. And a second piece is that this is rapidly evolving. One of the individuals who was talking about their role as a scammer was regretful, said it was a man, but he was transformed through software into an attractive female online with a female voice. And that's only one step away from having AI do all the work and no employees needed at all. And that's advancing incredibly quickly. So much of this challenge is education of the American consumer, because whether the scammer, no matter what country they're in, or if it's an AI scammer, you created a scammer, we're just going to, and they're going to keep shifting and moving from place to place, country to country. And so how much of your all's efforts are in building a much better system for educating American consumers so that regardless of wherever the scammer is, they don't get caught in it?
Thank you for the question, Senator. As part of our international approach, prevention and outreach is certainly a big concern of ours. Domestically, I know that the interagency has plans in the Executive Orders Action Plan to address the prevention and outreach and public awareness that happens here. I will tell you that INL's engagement with our foreign law enforcement partners is to train and address the evolving nature of the technology that's used in these scams, so that the law enforcement partners that we're working with can identify those and proceed accordingly with enforcement actions.
I think it's an essential part of it, because these are very cheap to set up, very easy to move, very effective, very profitable, all the reasons that it makes it hard to stop it. Stop it here, but it emerges over here. My last point here is I just want to encourage in the upcoming summit on September 24th that you all work with the president and his team to actually elevate this to a major point of discussion with Xi. There's lots of stories about China cracking down on operations that target Chinese, but there's also a lot of Chinese organizations that make a lot of profit that are highly tied into, including the Chinese military. And so it really merits a top-level advocacy in this upcoming summit.
Thank you, Senator Merkley. Senator Duckworth.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I thank you and the ranking member for the topic of today's hearing. Assistant Secretary Sommer, before I get to my question on scams, since I have you here, I wanted to take a brief moment to draw your attention to the many Americans, including my constituents, known to be detained and under exit bans in the PRC. I appreciate the State Department's long-running collaboration with my office on several of these cases, but I was disappointed that the White House refused to elevate these cases to the highest level during May's Trump-Xi summit. Before President Trump's September meeting with President Xi, I'd like you to provide my office with an update on how the administration is planning to raise these cases, including for my impacted constituents from Illinois, ahead of the next summit. Will you circle back with me and my team on our efforts to bring these Americans home?
Senator, obviously the detention and exit bans of American citizens in China and elsewhere is a top priority of the State Department. I commit that we will work with you on trying to elevate those.
Thank you, I appreciate it. I want to thank you for your personal engagement on the issue of scams, which have uprooted the lives of too many of our constituents, their families, and friends, as we've already heard. The law enforcement resources and training INL and others are bringing to bear on the issue are irreplaceable, especially in the greater Mekong region. I'm interested in the complementary work your Bureau is doing to keep that technical cooperation on track in the Mekong region, even when capacity gaps, political capture, or local corruption overwhelm our partners' willingness to solve the problem. How are regional mechanisms helping you keep going when bilateral work stalls, and what formats are you finding most useful for these conversations?
Thank you, Senator. Very good question, and we're working, obviously, as you indicate, both bilaterally and multilaterally. I was honored to host the senior official meetings on the U.S.-Mekong partnership, I guess, 6 weeks ago or so, in Jakarta, and scam centers were top of mind to all of the countries there. And so I think we're seeing a lot more increased attention in the countries of Cambodia, Burma, Laos themselves, because more of them, their own citizens, are being scammed as well. So we're working through MUSP, we're also working through ASEAN, and also working through APEC, I think, are the three sort of multilateral organizations that we're working through most closely. We also have stood up our own, as we mentioned earlier, this 13-member contact group, which includes many of the ASEAN members, but also many of the international partners of ours, to really try to focus on the enforcement and information sharing aspects of it.
Would you agree that in addition to what we've stood up ourselves, that our partners do like to talk together through trusted mechanisms like MUSP or ASEAN?
Yes, I do.
So knowing what you know now about the importance of regional forums for rooting out scams, would you recommend greater resourcing to EAP for multilateral engagements?
I think I'll understand we have substantial resources for those in general. So, I mean, I think the budget requests have been put in, but we definitely use those multilateral resources and are very significantly supporting ASEAN, APEC, and others.
Are you going to be the first administration official to come before this committee to say that you couldn't do better with more resources? You're not saying that, are you?
Somebody call the Guinness World Book of Records.
I was just going to say, I think this is your opportunity to say, yes, we need more resources. I mean, look, we once had exactly those dedicated resources, right? Until Secretary Rubio callously eliminated EAP's Multilateral Affairs Directorate last summer. You're his eyes and ears on this topic, and everything you're saying reinforces his choice was wrong. I appreciate your candor, and I hope we can keep engaging and advocate together for resources that your Bureau deserves. And I know, I think you need more resources so that you can do a better job, and I applaud you for the work that you're doing, especially in partnership with the Thai policing forces. And as you're rightly recognized today, the problem starts in the Mekong sub-region, but it doesn't end there. And more we're seeing scammers expelled from Southeast Asia, setting up fresh operations in Palau, Tonga, Papua New Guinea, and beyond, where scams pose a fresh slate of challenges. Law enforcement departments are often smaller. Their critical positions are just one or few people deep in some of these nations. Mr. Bedard, I don't want to be caught up playing whack-a-mole for the next decade. What is the State Department doing right now to preempt the migration of scam operations?
Thank you for the question, Senator. And I want to briefly touch on your question regarding budget. INL's request for fiscal year 27 is $30 million over its fiscal year 25 request for the Southeast Asia region alone to address cyber scams. So we're certainly putting more emphasis and more effort in the region to address those concerns. INL has a global budget as well. We are working on this throughout the world. As I mentioned, we have active programs in Southeast Asia, Africa, South Asia, the Western Hemisphere, the Pacific Islands, in the Middle East. We're trying to meet this problem where we find it. with the appropriate level of resources to stop the losses to American citizens.
But we've lost resources that was going to the Bureau for East Asian and Pacific Affairs, which could be an organization that helps with multilateral directorate relationships, right?
Well, I think as I've said before, the change in the structure hasn't affected our ability to execute on the mission within EAP.
Can you finish your answer, Mr. on what are you doing to prevent the migration of scammers to other places, especially the PICs?
We work with our foreign law enforcement partners across the world. What we are doing globally, we provide roughly $20 million in training and technical assistance on money laundering, cyber-enabled crime. We have a global law enforcement network that can embed U.S. cybercrime prosecutors in countries where this issue is raised. And we want to build that technical capacity so that these foreign law enforcement partners can work better with U.S. law enforcement, but also with other regional partners on this issue.
Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Van Hollen.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank both of you for your testimony today. Mr. Bedard, I want to ask you about cryptocurrency and specifically the role of crypto in global scam operations because, as I'm sure you're aware, it's become the currency of choice in many of these crypto scams. A March report from the U.S.-China Economic and Security Review Commission found, and I quote, the explosive growth of online scams into a massive global criminal industry has also been facilitated by crime syndicates' exploitation of cryptocurrency. You would not disagree with that conclusion, would you?
No, Senator.
And the FBI's 2025 Internet Crime Report found, and I'm quoting, cyber-enabled crimes defrauded Americans of nearly $21 billion, with cryptocurrency and artificial intelligence-related complaints among the costliest. So you acknowledge the role that crypto is playing in fueling these scams, right?
Yes, Senator.
And so are you aware of the debate here in the Senate with respect to what's known as the Clarity Act?
No, Senator. In my role in INL, I'm not aware.
Well, would you agree that anything that made it easier for scammers to use crypto would be a step in the wrong direction?
Senator, in my role as in DAS and INL, I would prefer not to comment on the Clarity Act or regulation of crypto.
Well, I'm asking this because this is a hearing on scams, and you've acknowledged that cryptocurrency plays a critical role in facilitating scams. And so my question was straightforward. Would you agree that it would be a mistake to make it even easier for scammers to use crypto? Mr. Chairman, I do want to just read an editorial that was in the Wall Street Journal the other day. The headline was "Clarity for Crypto, sort of." And one of the points they make about the current draft of the bill is, and I'm quoting, the bill would also exempt so-called decentralized crypto networks from anti-money laundering and know your customer rules. Would you agree that that would be a mistake to go in that direction? Would you agree that that would make scammers' ability to use crypto easier?
Senator, I do not have a response on the technical language of the Clarity Bill. INL's work with our foreign law enforcement partners is to build their capacity for blockchain analysis, digital financial investigations, and modernize their legal authorities to address the crime that is being facilitated oftentimes through cryptocurrency.
All right. No, look, I understand the position you're in. I would just say I think it's contradictory for one part of the administration, the State Department, to be saying we need to clamp down on these scams, which we do, and recognizing that cryptocurrency plays a big role in it. And then another part of the administration pushing for a piece of legislation that even the Wall Street Journal, not a left-leaning publication, acknowledges would make the problem even worse. And I hope before this body proceeds to consider the bill, we will fix these problems because they are significant, which is why law enforcement organizations like the National Sheriff's Association has expressed opposition and concerns. Let me turn to Burma. and I know others have raised Burma, Mr. Desambre, this is really for you because, as you know, that's become a massive center for scams, right? Would you acknowledge that?
Yes, I'll acknowledge that.
And has the State Department investigated how the junta is financially supporting or profiting from those scam centers in Burma?
We obviously are focused very heavily on trying to protect American citizens from the scam centers in Burma and everywhere else. And we understand that corrupt activities by government officials in these countries are part of the problem, and obviously are trying to address those as much as we can.
Well, I hope so, because you've acknowledged that they do pose a threat to American citizens. I think just within the last 2 months, you've told the House Foreign Affairs Committee, and I'm quoting, "We've seen in the last 5 years that the Civil War has continued and our policies have not, unfortunately, stopped the killing and not stopped the human rights violation." And you point out that we're continuing to look for a way forward to reduce these threats. I would just draw your attention to a bipartisan piece of legislation that I've introduced. It's called the Brave Burma Act. It is a piece of legislation that I introduced along with Senator Young and Senator McConnell and Senator Merkley, who serves on this committee. It's S3981. Would you be willing to take a look at that and get back to us with any comment?
Sure, Senator. Happy to take a look at it. Anything we can do to try to address the challenges that Burma poses is something we should consider.
I appreciate that. And I would just ask the chairman and the ranking member, maybe as we look forward to the next list of bipartisan measures that have been introduced, we take a look at this Brave Burma Act.
Yeah, the issue we're talking about certainly isn't a partisan issue, and I think all of us want to help our constituents, and so anything we can do in that regard. Burma's been a challenge for us on a international basis and on a diplomatic basis for a long, long time. I haven't looked at the bill. I will.
I appreciate that. It's designed to provide greater tools, as this committee's
Anything we can do to help in that regard.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. We appreciate that. To our witnesses, thank you so much. This has been an enlightening hearing, and I hope it underscores and helps Americans sit up and listen to the kinds of things that are going on out there that get in their wallets and extricate money and transfer it to China or somewhere else where the bad guys are. Obviously, there's some things that are easily preventable and some things not so much, but for those that are easily preventable and recognizable, we hope they'll sit up and take notice. So thank you. For the information, members of the committee, I'm going to keep the record open until close of business tomorrow on August 7th, and we ask our witnesses, if we have some more questions, if you would respond as promptly as possible. Your responses will be made part of the record, and we appreciate your service. We appreciate the focus you have on what is a pretty despicable problem that Americans are subjected to, and keep up the good work. And with that, the committee is adjourned.